fight, paint, dance, and sing to spread the
Welcome, everybody, and welcome to NFOTA, Northumberland Festival of the Arts, and its committee members who are reflecting back on the festival of 2022. It was a successful festival, and we are gathered after a reasonable break to think about, what worked, what could we make better, and how we're going to plan for the next festival to come in less than 2 years from now. So with me today, I have Gwyn Sheltema, who was our fearless leader and chair of the steering committee. And Gwyn was everywhere on practically every committee. And so Gwyn has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. We have Felicity Sidnell-Reid, who ran the very difficult programming committee, where basically all the artists were gathered and they did their best for us. We have Ken Morden, who was the man who went after our sponsors and donors and basically, kept our funding alive. Ken, welcome. And we have Kim Aubrey, who was an expert at getting the content to feed our website and our social media sites that kept the festival alive for over 18 months before it actually launched. So welcome, Kim. And I have 3 standard questions for all of you, which I'll go around and ask. What were your high points in a particular area that you handled? And what were some of the challenges that you faced? Please limit it to 3, don't give me too many. and of course, if you had to do this festival again, which I hope all of you are going to do, what would you change or what would you do differently? So let's start with Gwyn, because Gwyn, you were everywhere, as we said, and you saw it all. Let's start with you. What were your high points in this festival?
I think for me, the high point is the fact that it was successful. We set out with a really high expectation. We wanted to expand county-wide. We had 16 days of programming, which had never been done before. We wanted to set up all kinds of collaborations and so on with other arts organizations. And it really was a big undertaking, and we pulled it off. I mean, it certainly, as you say, things challenged us along the way, but we overcame it. And we not only had an artistic success, but we actually managed to come through financially too. So I think that was really good for such a big expansion.
Mm-hmm. On the financial side, what are we talking about here in terms of success?
Well, we made a profit, which in the world of festivals is very hard to do. For most festivals, you rely on government funding for at least a third, and on private funding for another third, and then hopefully another third from your ticket sales. And we managed to come through in all 3 sectors. So that's not to say everything was perfect. We certainly could look to see how we can expand our ticket sales and things like that, but we did come through. We also changed our status to a non-profit status, and because it was newly done for this festival, it meant we actually didn't qualify for a lot of the government funding, because you have to be a non-profit for at least a year before you apply. So we were actually handcuffed a little bit there in what we could apply for, but we did root out some other grants and applied for them and were successful. So next time round, hopefully it would be even better, because we can then go to some of the traditional funding agencies, because we'll have been a nonprofit for long enough. So I think that is hopeful for the future. I think one of the high points financially was our ticketing system. We invested in a ticketing system that worked beautifully, and we still have it. And so we can use it again. We know how to use it now. We know what else we can do to boost sales and so on.
Good. And if you have to make any fine tuning for the next festival, what would you suggest?
From my perspective, I think communication, and I don't mean with the public, I mean with the people organizing the festival itself. because we were so big, we had many different subcommittees all handling different pieces of it. And I sat on each of the committees. So in my head, I knew what was going on, but I didn't realize until quite late into the process that not everybody was aware of things. And so I think next time round, whoever is at the helm needs to have some sort of avenue to communicate what's happening in one committee to members of another committee, maybe some sort of a newsletter or some sort of a reporting that helps everybody stay connected.
Good. Well, thank you, Gwen. That's very helpful. So I'm going to swing around to Felicity now. So Felicity, you had a whole bunch of performers. I think we had 16 days of programming. How did you go about that?
Well, we approached both arts associations and individuals whom we hoped to engage in our project. And we did that with great passion and dedication. Mm-hmm. And that is absolutely necessary for running a festival, because if you only have to do it, Shane, then you're not going to get very far. You have to have people who are deeply engaged and who really believe in the project. So we were fortunate in that we found those people, and that so many people we approached to perform or to organize something or to put something on, for instance, the AGN put on a very interesting exhibit called Growing Wild, and it was very successful, and it was their contribution to something that they thought was important, that is bringing together the artists in the county to collaborate on a variety of events. Mm-hmm. So wait a minute, I've forgotten now where I got to.
That's okay. I mean, you tell me your high points. Like, what was the thing that really made you feel great about this?
Well, as Gwen said, I think my highest point was on the final day when we knew that all our efforts had led to a successful festival. And that was a moment of euphoria, really, because as Gwen said, there were difficulties, and the chief one really was the uncertainty that was the result of COVID. Mm-hmm. So that you always knew that maybe the whole thing would have to be shut down before we even started. And that was a sort of threat that we lived with for quite a time. Right. And then it wasn't just that. We also felt that in order to ameliorate that situation, we had to have a backup plan. And so, it was a challenge, but we tried to put events in places where, if necessary, they could be moved outside. And indeed, we had a number of events which were planned from the beginning to be outside.
Right. And if you have to make some fine tuning for the next time around, what would you suggest?
I'm with Gwen there. I think that it would be very, we did realize that, as she said, many of the people who were working on some aspect of the festival were not, they had no grasp of what was going on everywhere else. And I'm all for a newsletter that would be, a monthly newsletter which would summarize all the things that had gone on in that month in various committees and what it meant for progress with the overall program and organization.
Yeah.
Of which there were many, there were many facets to this. Just the fact that we had events going on in 8 or 9 places, 8 or 9 townships, essentially. You know, that was quite a challenge to find suitable venues in all these places. That's just an example.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you. I'm going to swing around now to Ken. So Ken, you're the man who went with the tin cup and asked for support.
Yes.
And I know at this time, a lot of arts organizations are out there asking for support, right? So you had to do something that was different or special to get that support. And what kind of strategy did you employ?
Most of what we tried didn't work. So, so we wasted a lot of time. But on the other hand, you know, that's how you learn and how to make things better in the future. So what I did find out is that if we could get talking to the people in organizations or individuals and explain to them verbally what this festival was all about, we got a nice response. Now, of course, not everybody contributes, but the ones that did were very generous. What was the most surprising thing from my point of view was the success we had with getting donations from people who bought tickets. The platform we used, Ticket Tailor, had a wonderful device in which you could nicely ask for donations. And I think, Gwen, you'll agree with me that the response, the amount of money we got, and I forget what the amount is, but it was quite large compared to the numbers of people who bought tickets. And so if anything that we learned that was truly important for the future is we need to spend more time or figure out how better we can leverage Ticket Tailor to get donations for us. It's a wonderful platform, and I don't think I certainly didn't realize the advantage of using it for fundraising. The other thing I found out is that there are most organizations or businesses in the area are not at all interested in the arts. And so sending out letters and communications or emails was almost a complete waste of time. But once you got a hold of people that were interested in it, then they responded. So some companies, such as Chemical, make it very, very easy, and they're great community supporters, but they're few and far between. So we have the basis for a reasonable or good campaign in the future, and without wasting a lot of people's time and going directly to the people and the organizations that we know are willing to give.
So Ken, given that you've gone through this experience, what changes would you make to your kind of funding approach, donor approach for the next time around?
Well, it'd be more of elimination. In other words, sending out written notes and so on and emails. I would recommend we don't do that in the future. It's a waste of people's time. We need to get people or canvas people who know other people, whether it be in organizations or we know are supporters of the arts, and they'll contribute. The one difficulty we had, which we can overcome next time maybe, but we had difficulty this time, is trying to describe to people what the festival was, and that was just a matter of timing, because people who donate, especially organizations, plan for this maybe a year in advance. But we didn't have the information, and understandably so. This is a new venture. So next time we should be able to trade more on the events that were successful and attracted people as evidence of how the donation can work for the organization or the person.
Good. Well, thank you, Ken. And now swinging around to Kim. Kim, I think you're on mute. Okay. So Kim, you were the person behind collecting most of the content that went on our website, and from there got disseminated onto Facebook and all the other, social media platforms. And, it was a lot of canvassing to get the information. First of all, how easy or difficult was it?
Well, I had done something similar with the pandemic journal that we had just been working on earlier. So the structure for it was set up already in a way, and some of the writers who I knew would be interested in contributing, I'd already been working with. So that was a good start. And after that, people really like to be interviewed, and they like to, some of them like to write for whatever reason. You know, people want to communicate, they like to be featured on the blog. So that part wasn't so difficult. And we had a good committee who know the community and were good at coming up with ideas for interview subjects and people who might be interested in writing something. So yeah, so I think that part went fairly smoothly, and it was quite successful. It was a really good way of connecting with the community, and that was one of our goals, especially in the first half of the time leading up to the festival. Was community outreach, really, to connect with artists and arts organizations and art lovers across the county. And I think our Northumberland art lover interviews went really well. So yeah, some of the highlights for me were a few of the interviews. Felicity and Chris did a really wonderful interview with Rick Beaver and one with Melody Crow. And Shane, your interview with Dimitri Papatheodorou was really fascinating. So I think we had some good content, and the blog at times was quite exciting, and I enjoyed working on it.
What would you recommend we do the next time around that's slightly different or better?
I think the challenge is always getting enough people, enough readers, big enough audience. So that was always the challenge, to build our subscriber list and also to build our social media network. And that will continue to be the challenge, and I think what will need to be worked on next time.
Good. Well, thank you. I guess I must make a contribution here as well in terms of the advertising and marketing that we did. So I'll be very brief. We had, I guess, 3 pillars. One, as Kim has mentioned, was the building up of the social media sites and the website content, which went on for about 18 months. And that put us in a good position when we started our real heavy advertising about 2 months before the festival. And so our prime advertising avenues were radio, local radio. We had 3 radio stations, and Facebook. And we leveraged that very well. I think there was not a day when you wouldn't hear a radio advertisement, or at least 3 times, and or Facebook posts coming up, advertising some of the events. And I think when we did our post festival survey, the recall from attendees was that Facebook had a very strong recall. I think something like 27 or 28% came from people who remember seeing the ads on Facebook. And the radio, I think, is more subliminal and probably led to kind of recommendations from friends, because they say, "Oh, I heard about it through a friend," but how did the friend hear about it? So we think that the radio had that effect on people. So those are the prime avenues we used. What would I do differently? Is I'd like to find out how we can attract people beyond the borders of Northumberland. Because if we look at our research, I think the majority, I think 80 or 90% of the people came from within Northumberland and the surrounding areas. But could we get people to come from Toronto or from even Oshawa? That's what we need to try and figure out the next time around, because we need to definitely broaden the audience base. We found that most of the audience bought about 3 tickets for 3 events. So if you take your ticket number and divide it by 3, that even breaks your audience further down. Now, if you can get that audience to double, then we could infer that they would be buying double that number of tickets. So that's what I think is the next frontier, and we have to figure that out. So yes, go ahead, Kim.
Well, just speaking to that point, Shane, I noticed that one of the events that did attract people from Toronto and from outside of the county was the tour of the Black Oak Prairie Savannah. There were a few people there who did come from Toronto, and they heard about it on social media from people in the county. So it might be a matter of what sort of events would attract people from Toronto, because that's the sort of thing they can't do in Toronto. Whereas
Right.
they can go to a play, they can, go to a reading, they can do a lot of, the things that are on offer quite easily in the city.
That's a good point. So having unique experiences that are not available in the city. That's a good one. So Gwyn, I'm going to come back to you on a question based on what Ken was saying. He said a lot of people donated money. Could that infer that perhaps our ticket prices are a little too low?
Our ticket prices were low, but they were low on purpose, because one of our mandates was to make art accessible to more people by keeping the tickets low. And that was one of the things we said to donors, was that, part of what we were doing was to try and keep the ticket prices really low so that more people could afford to come. And yes, we could put the ticket prices up, even marginally, but I think ultimately we don't want to be high priced, because that goes against our whole community vibe that we're trying to do here.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And in fact, I'm going to spin that around to Felicity and ask a related question. This festival was unique in the sense that it was focused mainly on local talent, local regional talent. And there was always a case to be made is, unlike other festivals that we know of, more famous festivals, if you bring in some marquee names from Toronto or from Ottawa or wherever, would we increase our attendee base? It's a temptation, but that can only come at the expense of the local artists. So is that something that, sort of intrudes upon the thinking or makes people want to go in that direction, or are we committed to promoting the local talent?
Well, this is a question of balance, Shane. In fact, though we focused on local talent, many of the people who performed for us or gave workshops are extremely well known. For instance, we had the Poet Laureate for Canada, Louise Sky Dancer, come to open the festival and to stay for the poetry event the next day. We had approached various arts organizations like Friends of Music, and when they put on their event, they had Rosina Greco, a very well-known young pianist whose reputation is sky high, be the performer. We had among the writers, we had Vicky Delaney. Can you still hear me? You've disappeared.
Yes, no, I'm here. We can hear you.
Good.
Go ahead.
We have who is a US bestseller, and last week was was fifth on Barnes and Noble's top sellers, along with Prince Harry, as she commented in her newsletter. That, however, is a big achievement, and she is very well known as a mystery writer. We had Ted Staunton, who is also a highly successful author, and also a performer, and he did a lot for the festival as partly as a volunteer and partly as a paid part of the performances. And so, you know, I'm looking at people who have both. We have people who have both outside connections and inside ones. And that's how we got people to take part in the festival. Many of the people we approached were from the outside, but we did it through local organizations or individuals who happen to have a connection with people.
You know, I'm glad you explained that, because there's this misconception probably that we are just a bunch of local amateurs trying to do something, or that we are trying to grow big. We're going to get the big names in. Yeah. So the fact that you have a balance, I think, makes a lot of sense.
That also, you know, I mean, I've just given you some examples. There was Saskia Tompkins too, who, you know, in her own field is both in the Music Hall of Fame and also is the champion Irish fiddler in the whole of the UK. And for people who are interested in folk music or that sort of mixed kind of music, she's a star. She is a local person with a world, with you know, an international reputation, as well as a growing one in Canada. Yes. So, yes, I mean, and then, you know, we look at Shannon Linton, who both organized a very, very successful concert, which engaged both the young people and older ones, and who, you know, I have myself heard her singing on the CBC. And I know she has, that's not the only time she's sung on a program on the CBC. So, you know, what I'm saying is we have here in Northumberland many stars and potential stars, and we engaged quite a lot of them. And that was wonderful, because we are not a bunch of amateurs, as a matter of fact. More or less everybody was experienced in arranging festivals, and certainly were by the end of it.
No, this is good stuff. I'm glad to hear all this, and I'm glad that we're talking about it. Is there anything else that any of you would like to add to the collective wisdom we have gained from this festival?
I think that we went too big, and my advice next time around would maybe be to cut down the number of days and concentrate some of the performances. And we also discovered a little bit of a niche here and there, which I think is worth capitalizing on, so that we're not the same as everybody else. And what I saw coming through in a lot of places was this idea of mentorship. You know, we collaborated with Film Access Northumberland with their Youth Film Award. We had young people, and when I say young, I mean teenagers who entered our call for one-act plays and who also submitted to the anthology. So I think there's room there to expand and to provide a service going forward, or to certainly have something distinctive about this festival, and that might be mentorships and scholarships and things like that.
Good. So between now and the next one, what needs to be done? What flames need to be kept mildly burning? Gwyn, any thoughts?
Well, we need to keep our social media channels going and our blog, because you know, it's a lot easier to keep them going than it is to rebuild them again. And I think also it'll keep our name out there in the interim. we need to, which we can do now, we have a really clear view of what needs to be done by when to be successful. And I think the second time around, putting a program together is going to be a lot easier because we know what worked and what didn't. We have a lot more contacts, and hopefully we don't have such a COVID threat hanging over us anymore. So we had a hard time finalizing a program in good time last time. And I think this time around we can be better with that, which then of course makes everything else a lot easier. It makes, you know, approaching sponsors easier when you actually have something to sell. So I think that would be the main thing. We probably have to get a steering committee together by the spring, and then maybe really knuckle and, you know, put all our concepts into place and our dates and all that kind of stuff, and then really get moving in September.
Okay, well, that's a good date. We shall keep that in mind. Well, I thank you all for being candid and honest with us on this session, because that's the idea, to share our best practices and our learnings. And I hope that the viewers who have tuned in have learned something as well about the Northumberland Festival of the Arts, what it takes to run a festival, and the commitment that's required from all of those volunteers and performers. So with that, thank you very much and goodbye.
Or off the cuff, orchestrated works of art, solo endeavors. We'll write, paint, dance, and sing to spread the word. We'll write, paint, dance, and sing to spread the word.